The first explosion ripped through the morning silence like a thunderclap, throwing dirt, smoke, and shrapnel into the air. Somewhere ahead, the crack of gunfire sounded closer than she could have imagined. She felt her heart slam against her chest, a pulse of adrenaline that made her fingers twitch on the rifle. In the chaos of that battlefield, she had one thought, one mission: to survive, and to protect those who could not protect themselves. And then she saw him. Her commander sprawled across the dirt road, clutching his leg, eyes wide with shock and pain, helpless under the hail of enemy fire. Her breath caught. Every soldier training video she had ever watched had led to this moment. But nothing had prepared her for the reality of seeing someone she respected fighting for their life right in front of her. Like, subscribe, and click the bell icon for more stories. The camera would follow her feet as they crushed through mud and debris, her uniform soaked in sweat and dust. Around her, the battlefield was a blur of smoke and motion, soldiers ducking behind shattered walls, tracer rounds streaking across the grey sky, and the distant roar of armoured vehicles moving in jagged lines across the cracked earth. She moved like a shadow, calculating every step, every breath. Fear was there, yes, but it was tempered by focus. She could not afford to hesitate. Hesitation meant death. And in that split second, she made a decision. She would reach him, or she would die trying. Her hands were trembling as she crouched beside him, the acrid smell of gunpowder burning her lungs. "Stay with me," she said, though she didn't know if he could hear her over the chaos. Her hands worked with practiced precision, cutting away straps, assessing wounds, finding the arterial bleeding, applying pressure. The world narrowed to the single, vital task of keeping him alive. Each heartbeat seemed amplified, echoing in her ears. She caught a flicker of his gaze, fear mixed with something else, recognition, relief, trust, and that fleeting look sparked a fire in her chest, a determination that would not be broken. The enemy fire intensified, forcing her to press herself closer to him, the dirt digging into her knees and palms. She remembered her training. Low profile, quick movement, prioritize life over comfort. And yet, every instinct screamed at her to pull back, to seek safety. She ignored it. She couldn't. Not when a man who had led her through countless missions now relied on her. Bullets whizzed past, some cutting the air dangerously close. Each sound was a hammer blow, a reminder that death could arrive in a single chaotic instant. Her mind ran calculations like a machine. Cover here, suppress fire there, get him to the trench by the rubble. Somehow, inch by grueling inch, she moved him, dragging him over the cracked asphalt and into the relative shadow of a collapsed building. Pain shot through her shoulders and back, but she refused to give in. She refused to falter, and then, as she laid him against the cold, wet concrete, a new sound rose above the firefight. The mechanical shriek of enemy reinforcements, their silhouettes now visible on the horizon. She felt a twinge of dread. There were too many of them, too close, and yet retreat was not an option. They would have to go through her first. A flash of lightning lit the sky, revealing her soaked, mud-smeared face, eyes blazing with determination. Every muscle screamed, but she didn't stop. The camera would linger on her expression, the fear, the grit, the refusal to surrender. And then she heard it, over the roar and the gunfire. A voice calm, almost surreal, cutting through the noise. "We're not leaving him." It was hers. Though she barely recognized it as she prepared for the next impossible step, moving from mere survival to the kind of heroism that changes history. And in that heartbeat, she realized something. What she did next would not just save a life, it would redefine courage. And then, as the first wave of enemy soldiers began closing in, she made a choice that no one in her unit could have anticipated, a choice that would be recorded in reports, in whispers, and eventually in military history. But even as she prepared, a shadow flickered across her peripheral vision. Something was coming, something she hadn't counted on. And for the first time, she felt a spike of fear she couldn't control. The distant rumble of armored vehicles grew louder, shaking the ground beneath her boots. Every instinct screamed for her to move faster. Yet she knew that rushing recklessly would mean certain death, hers and her commander's. She scanned the battlefield, eyes sharp, muscles coiled like springs. The sun, now obscured by smoke and dust, cast an eerie orange glow over the scene. Shadows flickered across shattered walls and the bodies of soldiers frozen mid-action. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down, heavy as the rifle in her hands, heavy as the responsibility in her heart. She repositioned her commander, dragging him behind a fractured wall that offered only the illusion of safety. His breathing was ragged, sweat and blood streaking his face. Yet his gaze remained fixed on her, trust unwavering even in pain. She couldn't allow herself to look away. Every second counted, every motion could tip the balance between life and death. Her fingers worked with surgical precision, checking wounds, adjusting bandages, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure he could hear over the roar of gunfire. "You're going to make it," she murmured. "Just hold on." The camera would follow her movements as she crouched, assessed and adapted. Her body moving like water around obstacles, bullets slicing through air too close for comfort. She ducked a sudden burst of gunfire, rolling to the side with her commander in tow, and realized that the enemy had already flanked them. They were closing in, methodical and relentless. But she refused to panic. Panic would kill them both. She had trained for moments like this, but no training could fully prepare someone for the terror of seeing your leader, your mentor, bleeding and vulnerable while the world exploded around you. Her mind raced. She needed a plan, something bold, something that no one else would dare attempt. Her gaze flicked to a nearby building, half collapsed but offering higher ground and a clearer line of sight. If she could drag him there, she could hold the enemy at bay until extraction arrived. But moving him across open ground under fire would be nearly impossible. She swallowed the fear curling in her stomach, pushed it down, and focused, one step at a time. 1 inch at a time. She whispered to her commander, words sharp and low. "I need you to stay with me. Don't pass out. Not now." His hand twitched slightly, a signal small but enough to ignite hope. She braced herself, gripped his shoulders, and began the painstaking crawl across the battlefield, her body scraping against rubble, her knees sinking into mud, the heat of explosions grazing her skin. Every step felt like an eternity. Every heartbeat was a drumbeat of defiance against the chaos. The enemy noticed, of course. Bullets pinged off concrete near her, some ricocheting dangerously close. She could feel the vibrations through her gloves, the air charged with the deadly rhythm of war. And then, as if the universe itself had decided to test her, a mortar round exploded mere meters away, throwing dirt and smoke in every direction. She shielded her commander with her own body. Grit and determination painted across every inch of her face, refusing to yield, refusing to falter. Somewhere behind the veil of smoke, a new sound emerged, the distant wail of helicopters, extraction teams closing in. Relief surged, brief and fleeting, because the enemy was still relentless. They pressed forward, unaware that the most dangerous force on the battlefield was not a tank or a squad of soldiers, but her, a woman willing to risk everything to save a life. And then, as she reached the relative cover of the ruined building, a shadow shifted in the doorway just ahead. Something moved that shouldn't have. Something that could change everything. Her hands tightened on the rifle, her jaw clenched. She had survived this far, yes, but what came next would demand a courage that no textbook could teach. And in that moment, time seemed to slow. She realized that the line between heroism and history was about to blur. But even as adrenaline surged, doubt crept in. Could she pull this off? Could one soldier, one woman, hold back the storm and secure not only survival, but victory? The ruined building offered a brief reprieve, but there was no time to breathe. She lowered her commander gently against the wall, crouched beside him, and scanned the battlefield. Smoke swirled like ghostly fingers, and the distant sounds of gunfire were punctuated by sharp, metallic clatters as enemy soldiers advanced. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the immense focus required to survive, to think, to act. She had trained for combat, but this was war in its rawest, most terrifying form, and she was no longer just a soldier. She was the shield between her commander and death. Every muscle in her body screamed from the crawl across open ground, every fiber aching from the weight of the wounded man she had dragged to relative safety. Her uniform was torn, soaked in mud and blood, her gloves shredded, yet she refused to give up. She wiped grime from her eyes and reached for her radio, fingers trembling. Requesting immediate extraction, she said, voice steady despite the chaos. Static crackled, then silence. The extraction team was delayed. Minutes away in a war zone could mean a lifetime, and she realized that she might have to hold her ground alone. The enemy closed in, their silhouettes emerging from the smoke. Weapons trained, she could see them calculating, advancing with deadly precision. And that's when she made a decision that would etch her name into military history. She couldn't wait for backup. She couldn't rely on anyone else. If she wanted to save her commander and herself, she had to act. She reached down, helped him stabilize, whispered, "Stay with me. Trust me." Then, with a deep inhale, she moved into the open, rifle raised, eyes scanning, body coiled like a predator. Bullets ripped past her, carving the air with lethal intent. Her training kicked in, instincts honed over countless drills and missions taking over. She moved fluidly, deliberately, using debris and shadows to her advantage, each shot calculated, precise. The camera would follow her movements like a slow-motion study of courage, the way her hands gripped the weapon, the fire in her eyes, the relentless rhythm of a soldier refusing to yield. And with every round she fired, she kept the enemy at bay, creating a corridor for her commander to move. He tried to rise, but the pain was too much. She was at his side instantly, adjusting his position, shielding him with her body as another explosion shook the building. Dust and rubble fell around them, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed suspended, just her, him, and the encroaching chaos. She could feel every heartbeat, every ragged breath, every tremor of fear threatening to overwhelm her, and yet she did not falter. Not now, not ever. Minutes stretched like hours as she held the line, covering her commander's retreat, covering the wounded, covering the hope that still flickered amidst carnage. When the extraction team finally appeared, helicopters slicing through the smoke-filled sky, she didn't T-run. She stayed, keeping the enemy pinned, refusing to leave until she was sure her commander could be moved safely. Her body was battered, her uniform shredded, her hands raw and bleeding. But she didn't care. She was focused on one thing. Life, saving life, her life and his. And then it happened. A sudden lunge from the enemy, close, too close. She reacted without thinking, a split-second motion that combined instinct, training, and sheer determination. The firefight reached its peak. The most intense, terrifying, and heroic moment she would ever experience. And in that instant, her actions transcended bravery. They became history. Not because of a medal, not because of orders, but because she had chosen to stand. Alone, against impossible odds, to save a life that depended entirely on her. As the helicopter landed, the rotors whipping dust and debris into the air, she finally allowed herself a brief glance at her commander. He was alive, breathing, pain etched on his face, yes, but alive. And as she helped him into the helicopter, she realized that she had done more than just survive. She had done something no one had expected, something that would be remembered long after the smoke cleared, long after the war ended. She had redefined what it meant to fight, to protect, to lead. And even as the rotors lifted them into the sky, a final shadow moved across the battlefield. a reminder that war is never truly over, and that courage, once revealed, can change everything. The helicopter ascended through the smoke-filled sky, engines screaming over the battlefield like a chorus of defiance. Below, the chaos continued, but inside, she allowed herself a fleeting moment of relief. Her hands, slick with blood and grime, trembled as she adjusted the straps around her commander's torso, ensuring he was secure. He was alive, breathing, groaning, but alive. And in that heartbeat, she felt a surge of something deeper than victory. Pride, relief, perhaps, but it was more than that. It was the quiet, unwavering satisfaction of knowing that in the worst possible circumstances she had chosen to act. The camera would linger on her face, mud-streaked eyes burning with exhaustion and intensity, yet framed with an unmistakable determination. She had survived the unthinkable, faced an enemy that outnumbered them, and emerged not just unbroken, but heroic. Her mind replayed the battle in fragments. The explosions, the bullets, the fear, and the fleeting moments of clarity when survival became instinct. She had moved through chaos like a force of nature, unyielding, precise, unafraid. And yet, beneath the heroism, there was exhaustion, a quiet mourning for those who had not made it. Her commander, sensing the weight of her gaze, reached out a trembling hand. I don't know how to thank you," he whispered, voice hoarse, eyes glimmering with a mixture of pain and admiration. She offered a small, tight smile, brushing the sweat and grime from her face. "You'd do the same for me," she replied, though part of her knew that very few could have acted with the same resolve. Few could have faced the storm, carried another through hell, and emerged alive. She didn't wait for accolades, didn't seek recognition. She had done what was necessary, and that was enough. When they landed at the forward operating base, the scene shifted from chaos to controlled urgency. Medics rushed to stabilize her commander, but all eyes turned to her. Some with disbelief, some with awe, all with the same unspoken question. How had she done it? How had one woman, battered, exhausted, and bloodied, held back the tide of enemies long enough to save a life? And as she recounted the battle, her actions became legend, the kind of story that would be passed along barracks, whispered in training halls, and eventually recorded in official reports. She hadn't just saved her commander. She had rewritten the definition of courage. In the quiet moments afterward, sitting on the edge of a cot, she allowed herself to reflect. Memories of the battlefield surged in her mind, the fire, the smoke, the adrenaline, the fear, the determination. Each flash of danger, each decision, each calculated risk had built upon one another to create a tapestry of survival and heroism. She thought about the soldiers who had fallen, the friends she had lost, and she felt a quiet sorrow tempered by the knowledge that her actions had honored their sacrifice. Courage, she realized, was never about glory. It was about choice. And in choosing to act, to protect, to defy impossible odds, she had achieved something greater than herself. Weeks later, as she stood in uniform, facing her superiors and fellow soldiers, the recognition came, a ceremony that would be recorded in history. Medals were pinned, photographs taken, words spoken that could never fully capture the magnitude of what she had done. Yet she stood silently, letting the moment pass over her. She didn't need the applause. History would remember her actions, the life she saved, and the bravery that had defied every expectation. And in the quiet aftermath, as she walked past the banners and the soldiers saluting her, she looked toward the horizon. The battlefield, the chaos, the fear, it was all behind her now, but it had changed her forever. She had faced death, stared it in the eyes, and acted anyway. She had saved a life, shaped a legacy, and redefined what it meant to be a soldier. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a story that would inspire generations. A story of courage, resilience, and the unyielding power of one person refusing to let fear dictate fate. Her eyes hardened, a quiet fire burning behind them, and she whispered to herself, "This is what it means to fight. This is what it means to lead." And for a soldier, for a hero, for a woman who had defied the impossible, that was enough.